Hey everyone, welcome back. So today's lesson is going to be about advanced harmony and some kind of easy to really advanced arranging techniques you can use to really spice up your compositions. So I arranged Feel It Still in 5 levels, so let's have a listen to that and then I'll break it down afterwards. So the 5 levels of Feel It Still would be 1, just the original. In the second one, I added 7th chords. And then in the third one, I added some chord substitutions. In the fourth one, I added more chord substitutions, mainly what's called a tritone substitution, which I'll go over in a second. And the last one is just kind of an insane, non-functional, crazy thing that happens when you just add every single crazy chord imaginable. That kind of sort of makes sense, and I'll explain the logic behind that a little bit later. So the topic of harmony and reharmonization can get really complicated really fast. So I'm going to try to give you guys some very practical tips that pretty much everybody could apply to pop songs and things like that. And then just for fun, I'm going to show you guys the possibilities of what harmony can do in kind of a more advanced classical and jazz context. So now I'm just going to mess around on the piano and then show you guys kind of my thought process on how I arranged these 5 levels. So the first level is basically Feel It Still with the complete stock harmony, where you have just a normal A minor chord, like that, and then you have a C major, then D minor, and I'm pretty much just playing basic triads. So I'm playing the A minor as the notes A, C, and E. Again, that kind of skipping every other note trick that I showed you guys if you're new to piano. Same thing with C, same thing with D minor. Now the first level, all I did was add the 7th. So on the piano, I went from A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to G and added that note, so you get this. Did the same thing for C, so I have a C major 7, a major chord with that 7th, and then a minor chord on D minor with that 7th, like that. And so far, everything is diatonic, or what's known as just all of the naturally occurring notes in the key of A minor or C major, depending on which one you want to think about. In this case, it's actually A minor, but they share the same notes. And diatonic meaning just everything's in the same key, like there aren't any outside notes yet. So if I kind of roughly play through this, remember, I am not a piano player, so don't judge me. But if I play the stock chords, we get... And it sounds good. That's what's in the original hit song. But if I want to make it a little bit more complex, for lack of a better term, and this would be one of those tips that I would apply for anybody. If you want to give your song just a slightly different vibe, or complex is not exactly the word I would use, but a different tone or mood or feel, or have a little bit more of a jazzy sound, whatever that means, basically add 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. And all this means is that you take your basic triad on the piano and you skip every other note, skip another note, you add a B. So in this case, I have a C major 7th, C, E, G, B, skip another note, I get D. So now I have a C major 9. And then if I go C, E, G, B, D, F, I have the 11th. And if I skip again, I go to A. So I have this gigantic chord, and if I skip another note, I'm back to C. So that's why 13th is as far away from the root note as you can get. So again, we went from a C major chord, C, all the way to a C 13th, like that. And a lot of times a really common trick is to raise the 11th to what's called a sharp 11, because you sharp the naturally occurring 11th to F sharp, which basically is a D major chord over a C major chord. You almost get this kind of bitonal effect of C and D over the top, and you get that really beautiful sounding. And I believe it's in my third arrangement of Feel It Still where that occurs. So let me just play around and improvise on the piano, somewhat poorly and clunky, but you'll get the idea as far as the harmonies go. And this is really my composition process. I like to sit at the piano and just noodle and find cool voicings, and then later on I'll figure out how to arrange them and things like that. So you can take something like, and then once just adding a simple 7th chord, you could do, and then you could do like a, and then in the last chord I added a 9th. So you could add a 9th for each of these. It's hard to do on piano without actually arranging it and practicing it, because you just don't have enough fingers. But if you do, and then that wonderful kind of like D over C chord, then that D minor 9, that, and then maybe for the last one you could do an A minor 9, like that, or an A minor 6th. And it gives you a really beautiful kind of lush sound if that's what you're going for. The point is there's really no limit to how you can rearrange and reharmonize things. Something I love to do too is emulate other classical composers, for instance. You could do this in pop song styles and things with instrumentation, how something's recorded, and emulate a certain pop artist. But you can easily do this with classical tunes, where if I wanted to, say, do kind of a hack impression of Debussy, you could do, and just kind of emulate Clair de Lune. That's why when I mentioned last time about learning how to improvise and learning the nuances of other people's styles, they give you the fluency and the freedom to kind of improvise in other composers' languages or other songwriter styles, so that way you can freely imitate them and then learn how to borrow things from them into your own compositions. So to kind of do a short recap, the first way you can spice up your compositions and songs is just to add a little extra flavor or spice to your chord progressions. So maybe make them 7th chords, make them 9th chords. You can start doing things like altered dominance if you want to. Not to get too complicated, but generally in songs on the 5 chord, you can start making alterations. So maybe you have a 9th, but you might make it a flat 9. So say for instance on like an A major chord, you had the 7th, but you could take the 9th, which is normally a B, and flat that. And that's a very common sound in jazz. You get that. Or you could do what's called a sharp 9, where you take the 9th and then raise it a half step. So you get, which is a really common blues technique. Where you have basically the major third and minor third at the same time. Which sounds awful, but you add in the other notes. Ah, sounds good. And that's one of my favorite chords to use, honestly. That's a kind of a Jimi Hendrix blues-ism. And if you want to, you could basically alter the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th all in one. So say we take that same A major chord, we could flat the 9, we could sharp the 9, and then we could flat the 13th like that, and you might end up with something like, now, it gets really complicated, and at the end of the day, it's kind of up to you if you think that sounds good. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's needlessly complicated. One would argue my 5th level of Feel It Still that you listen to is needlessly complicated. However, the cool part about that arrangement, I basically decided on the chord progressions by just doing a descending bass line by half step. So if you notice, the first bass note is an A, and the last bass note is an A. So I basically just went all the way, and then I just kind of reverse engineered it and just put a random chord that fit with that note and the top note at the same time. So I can't exactly remember what it was, but it was like, and I'm just doing kind of diminished chords and seventh chords. There's really no rhyme or reason. It just sounds good. Because at the end of the day, your ear is kind of the thing that determines it. You can get super theoretical with secondary dominance and, substitutions, diminished chord substitutions, and crazy, crazy things. But at the end of the day, just use your ear, and if it sounds good, it is good. Now, the last principle that I mentioned in one of my arrangements was the idea of substituting chords, or adding chords that aren't originally there. So I believe if you look at my third version, it has what's called a 2-5. And that's a really common jazz technique. It's a little bit advanced for pop songs because modern pop songs just don't do this anymore. But if you listen to any kind of pre-1960s pop song, kind of like Sound of Music, you know what I mean, like old musicals or old jazz standards or the American Songbook, they have a chord progression that's called a 2-5-1, which is basically the second chord in the key, the fifth chord in the key, and then the first chord. So what you can do is kind of reverse engineer that. So if I know the second chord of Feel It Still is a C major, I can precede that by its own 2 and 5, which in C would be D and then G. So I could play the one chord A minor. Oops, let's try that again. And instead of going just to C, I could do A and then maybe do a 2-5 and then go to C. And then on my version, I added an extra like E half diminished which then provides motion to D minor. So that way it's not a static progression, because the progression to Feel It Still is fairly simple. But if you add those extra kind of chord substitutions or extra chord progressions, it gives it harmonic motion that makes it more interesting. And on my fourth version, basically what I did was I added flat nines and sharp 11s and things, but I added what's called a tritone substitution, which is fairly advanced, but basically all it means is you can replace a dominant chord or a 5 chord by another dominant chord that's a tritone away. So on that instance, I believe I was going to do, I think it's like B flat major, like that. Let's use C major because it's easier, no sharps or flats. So the 5 chord in C major is going to be a G, like that, and a tritone away from G is D flat. So instead of playing G7 to C, like that, where you get the, what you can do is play a 2, like that. And the way that functions, for those of you that want to get really into it, is that when you do a dominant chord, the most important part of that chord is the 3rd and the 7th. And when you do a chord a tritone away, the 3rd and 7th kind of flip-flop, but that interval relationship is there, which I know sounds incredibly jargony, but that's how that works. And it's one of the most common substitutions in jazz. So your assignment this week is going to be to reharmonize the melody that I'm going to give you guys in the PDF at the description of this video. So basically look at the melody, and then I'll have some places for where you can put chords, and then just simply fill in the chords. So you could either just do it, keep it really simple and just use, like, I don't know, 7th chords or 9th chords. For those of you that want to get really adventurous, you can add in as many insane chords as you want to, or, maybe add some techniques that weren't in this video. But as always, if you do have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you guys in the next video.